Lane Community College presents the Lane Peace and Democracy Conference.
And can you really succeed in war in the first place? You know, is there such a thing as winning a war?
We have now surpassed the military budget of the rest of the world combined.
The world can no longer entertain the delusion that the U.S. standard of living is possible for the entire planet.
I've tried the kumbaya, and we're all the same, and you know, that doesn't work anymore.
Just as war is too important to leave to the generals, civil liberties is too important to leave to the lawyers.
Women are standing up in these prestigious positions, and it's time.
We live in a society that is unequal, that is unjust, that is full of oppression and racism.
We need to commit to removal of all our forces.
And a favorite law enforcement tactic is to disturb a hive and then listen for the buzz.
You do not clear-cut forests to make toilet paper.
And then the riot police came in and told us, okay, everyone needs to stand in the sidewalk unless you want to get pepper sprayed or arrested.
And the Peace Center will be an important element in making a difference for ourselves, our community, and in time, the world.
And that all rights are equally important. The right not to be tortured or the right to vote is as important as the right to shelter and the right to food.
The biggest threat to humanity, it does come down to massive death.
Pepper spraying and shooting automatic rubber bullets into the crowd, so it sounded like machine gun, and everyone was pretty scared.
And our country has 1 out of every 100 of our people in jail.
The world economic system is destabilizing.
Terrorist acts are better treated as criminal acts with political implications rather than as an act of war.
The need to teach peace is obvious. The need to teach people other values besides war is obvious.
And if we leave it to a political party and a leader to decide whether to bring those troops home, they're not coming home.
So welcome all to, this workshop. It's called Transformational Healing Through Equity and Social Justice, and my name is Carmen Urbina, and I work for the Eugene School District 4J, and I've been in this community for many years. And
my name is John Lenssen, and I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you and to be actually working with Carmen this afternoon on this topic. And I teach classes at the University of Oregon and also do some work with the 4J School District and work with other school districts throughout Oregon.
And before we start, I want you to go to the cover of this presentation, and these are pictures that were taken by my middle school, now high school, daughter, Gina, in the last marches that we did here in Eugene and also in Salem in protest of the lack of immigration reform that our government is not taking. And so she took those pictures, which to me reflected really what we're talking about here, equity and social justice, and what does that mean, and through whose eyes are we looking at this. And also I want to share with you that this presentation actually is a very personal presentation. When we were asked by Elizabeth, to do this, John and I, sat down and we talked to each other, and what you're going to see here is really a reflection of how do we do this equity and social justice work, and what do we need to do for the I. And when I think about equity and social justice, I don't think here, I think here. And how do we start doing that in an effective way? And so both John and I took this journey together, and we're inviting you all to take this journey with us. And so you're going to see a lot of our personal stories that we're going to be sharing with you. And with this, I really want us just to take 20 seconds to really breathe in and out. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And really concentrate on that word. And the theme, and I love the theme today, is, connected back to Mother Earth. And breathe in and breathe out as we start this journey together today. Thank you. So, we hope this works. So why are we here today? As John and I sat down and looked at the possibilities of doing this training, we thought, well, why are we here? So we thought, we need to really look at this work as transformational work. And transformation has to happen through healing. And these are words that for years and years, I believe that movements have refused to really go there because it's all about here. But how about connecting to this, to the heart and to the soul? And this workshop hopefully will provide you with tools that will allow you to identify what is systemic oppression. And as we are doing this transformational work for us, and how we're doing this transformational work for what we believe in around equity and social justice, how do we start then interrupting oppression and interrupting those ills and what I believe that it's the big lie that we believe that sometimes we can't come together and work, in a positive way. So that is why this workshop will go to what is our transition, what is the transformation, and how do we start interrupting. And it's a circular because it's constant. It never ends. Sometimes we feel, well, we just need to do that and it's going to be over. And I believe also that many of us, we're going to take a journey together and think about self-transformation, but it's really a journey. It's a path. When we're talking about equity and social justice. And we might believe we're in the same path, but we might not be. And so when we recognize that we're not in the same path, what are the things that we need to do? And what are the things that we need to realize? And what are the things that come up for us? And so those are some of the things that we're going to be sharing today.
And we might be on the path in the same place, in the same point at a particular moment in time. But part of the work is understanding for each of us what it took to get there. And that we have different experiences. And so we're doing our personal work. We're doing our personal healing, but we're connecting that with our interconnection, our connections, and our actions. And so when we talk about compassion, we're talking about compassion for ourselves, but also compassion for others. When we talk about transformation, we talk about self-transformation, but we're also talking about transformation of our groups, our relationships, our systems, our organizations. So that's why we talk about this work being healing, because the healing is both inside and outside. And I'm just reflecting on Mark Harris's earlier workshop today when he talked about that connection. We are all naturally connected, but we lose sight of that. We lose sight of that. So we have to reestablish our connection. And part of that is to understand that we may be at the same point. We may be headed in the same direction, but our paths, our histories are different. So we talk about social justice and we talk about fairness. In the work that Carmen and I do, the focus is often on equity, which brings those two together. And equity, and this, since our work is more concentrated on schools right now, students, families, community, and what's happening in schools, the focus of equity is on the equitable outcomes. So we have to look at ourselves, our responsibility, but also our systems. So equity is not same treatment. Equity is more than equal opportunity. Equity is guaranteeing through the path of social justice and action that the outcomes are equitable. So that's why we use the term equity.
And then we have social justice, and breathe in what that means. Listen to that, what that means. Social justice, and it's usually used to describe movement towards a socially just world. But, in this context, I believe that social justice is based on the concepts of human rights and equality, and can be defined as the way in which human rights are manifested in the everyday lives of people at every level of society. How human rights are manifested. Can you sit with that a little bit? How human rights are manifested. How are we manifesting human rights? And we're still in this path when we're talking about social justice. And how are we manifesting? How are we manifesting that? And we make movements, but we go back, we go forward, and we go back. And as we come together and fight for one cause, what happens? So I just want you to sit with that a little bit, and we're going to come back to that.
And again, as we're really working for and being a part of social justice and actually manifesting the change and with the way we live and what we act towards, the work has two components. So in the personal work, we really have to look at ourselves. We have to understand ourselves. We have to understand our culture, the deeper, the invisible parts of our backgrounds, our belief systems, and who we are in the world. And with that, the personal work, especially in the work around oppression, the work around racism, the work around classism, the work around sexism, the work around heterosexism, we have to really examine and work on our own biases. That's the personal work, because we live in a society that is unequal, that is unjust, that is full of oppression and racism, for example. We are impacted by that. We have to continue to do that work of our own unlearning around our bias. And at the same time, our personal work is strengthening our assets. It's being mindful of what we bring and what we offer, and allowing our voices to be strong and our actions to be strong, coming from that place of strength. And that moves us into healing and transformation. And the work that we do in community with others, the work that manifests in action, also has to be permeated with that compassion and that honesty of dialogue. So when Carmen and I work together, and Carmen says, John, I really needed you to speak up in that situation, and it hurt when you didn't speak up, I get to learn from that. That's the honesty, that's the dialogue that will then result and enhance the action. And not only enhance the action because next time I will speak up, but it also strengthens our relationship. It strengthens our community, John and Carmen working together. So, but part of the reason that Carmen and I can be honest with each other is that we're compassionate with each other. We believe in each other, we support each other. We want each of us to learn, to grow, and to be supported. So the compassion goes hand in hand with the honesty. Yeah. And one without the other will not strengthen our community work, will not strengthen our actions, and will not lead us to the healing and the transformation that's so necessary.
And it's not easy. It is not easy for me to go to John and say, John, you didn't speak up when I needed you. Because there's a lot of things, and I call it clutter, mental clutter. I want to blame, I want to shame, and I want to judge John for not speaking up when I needed him. And I think we've all gone through that. And so that's where the personal work has to be constant when we're talking about equity and social justice. We're talking about our lives. And that's why, when we saw that picture, it reflects really the path that we all take when we decide to do this work. And it's hard, and it's painful, and we cannot do it without taking care, again, and this is going to be a common theme today, of our souls and our hearts. And so to me, to say, John, oh my God, how I needed you. And you did not speak up. And I'm telling you this with love and compassion. And please, next time, do so. And John can come back and say,
I can say in a very defensive way, I can say, well, here's why I didn't speak up, and explain and justify and support my intention. Or I can really listen to what was needed in that moment, and the honesty and the compassion that Carmen just shared with me, and I can hear what was missing, and I could hear what was needed, and I can say, you know, I hear you, and next time I will. Or I might even go back and speak to some of the people who needed to hear from me. But I can do that because she approached me with compassion and not with judgment and not with blame. I would need to do that even if she did approach me with blame or judgment. But because she approached me with compassion and love, I can hear her words, I can hear her experience, and working together now, I'm not just being in a defended place.
and that's why that personal work and that community work, you know, needs to be together, because through self, you know, healing, and through community, take my hand, you know, it brings us more strength. And so it's a continuous circle that you get stronger and stronger and stronger. But it's a day-to-day type of work that needs to happen. And we haven't been modeled this. We've been modeled, I'm going to be right, I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to prove you wrong. And there's no other way. And so when we come to that, our own internal voices and clutter that are in our minds does not let us listen. You know, one of the great things that John has taught me is intent and impact. You know, what was the intent and what was the impact, and how to articulate that. But how to come to this work? I've done this work, and I see many of my elders in this room in different ways, and I've done it with the hammer. And I'm going to bash your head down. You know, and I've tried the kumbaya, and we're all the same, and you know, that doesn't work anymore. So the only real way that I have found this work to be sustainable within me, and this is my experience, is that I really have to do that constant work. And you see this, not here. You see this. So I have to be healing every day, and I have to be forgiving every day. And when we're in systems of oppression, we see things, and we have to go home, and sometimes we can impact it, and sometimes we can't. And, you know, sometimes I have to go home and say, oh my God, why couldn't I do this? And then I go to self-blame, self-shame, and self-judgment. And then really breathe that in, own that, and forgive myself for that, and shower myself with love. Because that's the only way I can get up the next morning and continue. That's the only way. And I reach out to people that love me and say, hey, this is the day I had today. What do you think? Because that's the only way we can do this work, if we are in that journey of what we're calling equity and social justice.
And the healing through our connections with friends and community and other activists and the people who are part of the social justice struggle, that kind of breaks the Western norm, where, you know, if you want to heal, you go do it in an isolated way, maybe with a therapist, but it's all in isolation. And yes, we need to do some of that work, some of our self-talk and our learning and our compassion for ourselves, but we strengthen our healing through doing it in community and in connection and in support of each other and with love. So Carmen is great about reaching out and sharing and asking for support. Some of us aren't so good, so we get to pay attention. So when we're in community with people, we get to pay attention to who's vulnerable, to who's in the midst of pain, or who is feeling blocked, or who is being discriminated against, who is being harmed, who is being injured. When we're in community, we pay attention to that. So sometimes we reach out to help ourselves and connect, but sometimes we reach out to connect with each other. And that's the two-way part of it, and that's where the strength comes in. We strengthen ourselves, we strengthen our community.
And the ultimate goal is that all members of society, regardless of background, have basic human rights and an equal opportunity to access the benefits of their society. And I really want you to sit that, in silence with that as you read that. That all members of a society, regardless of background, have basic human rights and an equal opportunity to access the benefits of their society.
It's actually rooted in civil rights law.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a principle that some people made up. It's not rooted in civil rights law in every nation. It is rooted in the Civil Rights Act of 1965 in the United States. So there's a foundation for that. There's a history of our movement. We're in this together. We all have familiarity with different parts of that history. Some of it may be history around civil rights. Some of it may be history through anti-war or peace or sustainability. But we're in this together, and it's part of the rights that we share, both as humans and international people connected, but also part of our rights are rooted in law. So there is a foundation there.
And the realizations that there are different journeys in multiple ways, and not all of them are equitable. And so this is what this means. And we wanted to start, part of this conversation in that I am in one of those pictures, and John is in another one. And our paths, actually, as we started our journey around equity and social justice, have come together, and then they go apart, and they come together, and they go apart. But for me, as a person of color, the journey has been filled with unearned disadvantage, disempowerment, and internalized racism. And what internalized racism does to a person of color, and how painful that is, and how I, as a person of color, have to try and work harder than anybody else. That is my belief.
Okay, can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah.
I'm feeling really uncomfortable here right now because when I came in, now, and this is what I do in society, so it's a good example, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
When I came in, you told me what? About the circle. You wanted everybody in the circle. Can we get everybody in the circle? Because I think that is, I hate to interrupt right now, but it's like, I think that what you said was right. And then I'm thinking that we're not all in the circle
It's fine
together.
with me if I'm sitting out of the circle.
Good. Well, I'm just saying.
I feel like I am in the circle.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I flashed on, well, what is the difference? Because I look behind, see people. I'm just thinking that we all can see one another. And I don't know what your base was to tell me that. So I'm just.
We told that to everybody, and people made their choice.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I just wanted to get that right. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is something about being in circle that is powerful and connecting. And there is also something about people's individual comfort and needs. And so part of this work is the balance.
Honoring those people.
So it's, but it's very appropriate for you to raise that, and for you or anyone in the circle to, at different times, extend the invitation to others. Please, if you want to, join the circle. Because sometimes people come in late, and they don't know that they're welcome in the circle. So for those who maybe would like to join this more inner part of the circle, please know that you are invited to move and join the circle. And for those who are comfortable on the outside, we respect that as well.
Okay. I guess the idea of the circle relates very strongly to some of the things that you were commenting about, and that is that we don't all see the world the same way. And that when people talk about a circle, I think of many layers in a circle. I did not feel I was out of it. When I drop a pebble in the pond and the circle goes out, there's not one circle. There are many circles. So I guess it's important to be aware that when we perceive something and interpret it, that others may not be seeing it the same way. So I think that's an important starting point.
Right, but I think from her perspective, it was that
Talking stick.
From her perspective, I think that she felt excluded from the circle by not everybody joining the circle, as if it was like not a circle.
That we were going to, and so and I'm the kind that always had to play Monopoly by the rules. You know, I mean really, because I thought if you're going to cheat, well, just get out of the game.
But I really like what she was saying about the heart thing. You know, approaching people from the heart, and I think there was a couple of words like kind of maybe left out. Maybe they actually come in here, but I think it has like a lot to do with like being kind and creating in creation what we're creating in the world. If we're creating a positive influence on people by being a certain way, and it's really of a giving in nature, what we give of ourselves, and the way, I mean, we can give anger or we can give kindness, and if we choose to give kindness, then I think we're being more productive at creating the kind of community that we would like to live in. If we shun our neighbors or if we shun the people, even in simple ways, then we're not like being part of our society or being, you know, coming together, even though we live separately, and realizing that we live in a community rather than just a personal venue.
I said that I'm sitting out of the circle and it's fine for me because the basic idea of this talk is to, like, you know, not only give your mind to the figures and the terms and, you know, whatever is on the board and whatever Carmen is saying. It has to be felt by heart, like Carmen is saying that she feels it by heart, the social justice and equality and those kinds of things. So that's what the purpose is. And if everybody's part of it, then, you know, it's just fine. Nobody has to show any just the physical affiliation with the talk, and by the time you are out of the room, everything is gone and done. So that's not the idea. It's the idea of having part of the social justice and equality and you know, those kinds of things, and like what you call diminishing differences among different races. So that's what it is, and we shouldn't forget by the time we are out of the room. Thanks.
And there's one more comment with Ruth.
I appreciate everybody's self-reflection about ourselves in the room, but I also wanted to get back to right at that moment what Carmen was saying about these two interconnected journeys, and she was sharing with us about her journey and unearned disadvantage, disempowerment, and internalized racism, which is such an intense thing to share with us. And I just don't, I mean, our conversation went into an important direction because it came out and people had things to say, but I just want to make sure we get back to that and to the two journeys that they were about to tell us about.
And thank you for honoring my story. It was not, it's not easy to share.
I think it was very interesting what she said. She said something like, I feel out of the circle. It was something like that, or this, but this, because I just took this, there was, we were talking about nonviolent ways of communication, and I think what you were expressing, and you didn't say how you felt. I would like to hear how you felt about, and I think it is important because it has to do with communication and working with people, and you know, I think it has to do in a sense with
absolutely
the same. It's more just that when, I'm sorry, your name was?
I'm John.
John. Yeah. When John brought it to my attention that was the goal of sitting, so please try to include, and then I was sitting here like this. I have someone behind me, and it doesn't bother me. It's just that I thought you were saying that effectively, and I looked around, yeah, I can see people. I can see everyone. We're all now in, the metaphor for the circle or the communication level in a circle is that you're all facing each other. In China, you never want to put your back to somebody. It's a disgrace. You're saying that you don't, I always try to be thinking about not putting my back to people. Not that it bothers me. I could get through anything, but it's just that I was thinking about being able to see you all, know who you are, and it was directed, right? So, thank you. Thank you. Oh, well, see, I can't see him. I don't know.
Well, I feel like since I'm one of the ones sitting in the back, I need to say something. And we are talking about that we are in different paths. So, so the people who sit in there probably they're on their own path, and I am in my own path in the back. And probably that is that I have something to do after this, that I might need to leave, so that's what I choose to be in the back. So I don't think it's going to interrupt anything, and I think we should continue with the presentation, if we don't mind. Thank you.
Sometimes I like to hide in the back.
Yeah. But I think that this is not about sitting in a circle or sitting in the back. I think that there's listen to the conversations, and listen to what this means. And this is also the journey that we may take, when we are working around equity and social justice issues. And so this is not about sitting in the back or sitting in a circle, but this is about how do we come together in communication? How do we really listen to each other? And how do we do it, from distance without the judgment or saying, what's up with that lady? What is she doing? What is she saying? She has her truth. And why don't we listen to her truth and be open but the clutter is already telling us, why did she do that? She interrupted. What's those people in the, yeah, she's right. The people need to be in the circle. So that's the clutter that, truly, come on. Let's be sincere here. But you see that, but that's the clutter. And why don't we just listen, okay, and we listen to everybody's truth. And let's honor everybody's truth. Your name? Laura. Laura brings the truth. She brought it to the circle. And everybody shared why they might not be in the circle, because they have it. You see how that transforms? We just saw the impact of transformation.
What do you mean?
Right here, we saw a microcosm of what can happen. We spoke about it. We brought it to the circle. We brought it to the center of it. And therefore, when we leave, we're not going to take it out there. It's done with. And we honor Laura, and we honor everybody that decided to be outside the circle. There's no shame, blame, or judgment like that. It's just okay. It's just okay. So let's sit there. Feels good. So, thank you for that. So as a person of color, we were talking about the different paths. The paths that I, have chosen, it's all around equity and social justice and fighting for equity and social justice, and engaging in equity and social justice. But as a person of color, the work becomes deeper because there's other factors that are affecting the work that I do because I am a person of color. Unearned disadvantage, disempowerment, internalized racism. And there's privileges that I don't have. Sometimes I don't have the privilege to go to a store and just buy something without being followed. I don't have the privilege to have breakfast with my 8-year-old and just have a plain bowl of Cheerios without my 8-year-old listening to news around immigration bashing that's going on. And my 8-year-old saying to me, Mom, why do they hate us so much? I don't have that privilege because I am a person of color.
And as a white male European American, I didn't grow up with the experiences that Carmen grew up with, but also in Carmen's life, many of her experiences of racism and disempowerment came in the United States. So each of us has a different experience. But I grew up thinking we're all equal. I grew up thinking, if you want to say something, say it. If you want to lead, lead. You know, if you want to do something, study hard and move forward and do it. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, in an all-white elementary school, and I did not know or understand or have any exposure to racism other than the privileges that I had in that system. But I had no awareness of that. And my early exposure to inequality was more in my head and in my studies and through a perspective of social justice. But I did not know what it was like to sit at the table with my parents or with my children and wonder, why do they hate us so much? You know, I didn't have the experience of being followed in the stores or pulled over. I didn't have the experience of being a student in college and having people wonder if my perspective was all about my race, or not believe me, or wonder if I was playing the race card. You know, and even today in my professional work, I walk into a room with people of power and privilege and talk about equity, and I'm often given full respect and credibility, especially from other white people. I'm not viewed with suspicion. I'm not viewed, oh, here he comes again, pushing his issue or exaggerating his experience. You know, I have that white privilege. So part of my journey has been and continues to be conscious of that. To understand that Carmen's experience and the experiences of people of color are in fact different from mine.
And we have been in multiple meetings where I have brought a message, and I am labeled as the very angry, intimidating, you've heard it, Latina, here she goes again. And I'm angry and intimidating. And I'm talking just like I'm talking to you. John is sitting beside me and he says the same thing. My ideas are totally pushed aside like nobody ever heard me, because I'm the only person around the table that looks like me. But John says it. And in my mind, I said, yes, thank you, John, for saying it. And to my peers and colleagues around me that did not listen to what I was saying, or did not hear, or they blocked their ability to hear me just because of what I look like, or what their interpretation, or what they believe that I am, or the lie that they believe that I am, that they have started to believe as reality. You know, and then to me is, Guadalupe says, fill in with love and light.
And then Carmen and I need to talk right after that, because we need to understand what just happened. We need to acknowledge what just happened, the unfairness of it. And I get to ask, you know, was it the right time for me to speak? Should I have been silent and referenced what you said? You know, should I have supported what you said? I mean, and we get to talk about that. But to just acknowledge what just happened in the room, my role with my white privilege is to connect. See, now I'm not just self. Now I'm connecting with my friend, you know, my colleague, the person that I am in the social justice work. I'm connecting not only just to say, what happened, but to validate that what she just saw was real, that it just happened once again.
I'm not crazy. And this brings also, you know, the ability for, right now we're talking about John and Carmen, but this is, imagine 8 Carmens. Imagine 8 Johns. Imagine 200 Carmens. Imagine 200. We started this journey separately, as we have indicated. But now we are in a circle. We come together when we do this work and we support each other. But then what we do with all those colleagues that ignored me or that labeled me, what do I do when I go home with that? Where does that sit? For many, many years, it sat in anger, frustration. You know, and it's okay to be angry and frustrated. But then what do we do with that anger and frustration? And, you know, and that's the most important thing for the self.
My mom, she's a few years short of a master's degree, and I'm wondering if whether or not what you feel, I mean, because I'm not there, I'm not experiencing your experience, but I'm wondering whether or not it has more to do with you being a woman versus you being a person of color.
Does somebody want to
Because
respond?
my mom told me that.
About that?
Because my mom told me that the most oppressed people in our society are women, and men kind of really dominate the structure, the social structure, and a lot of the structures within our society. And so I'm kind of, and she says both. It could probably be both.
Yeah. And as a person of
but
color,
I'm wondering how you might reflect on that. But.
I have to tell you that yes, it might be part my gender, but one of the definite things that comes in is my race.
Yeah, I don't think
and
you can
cannot exclude that. It's definitely part of the equation.
So you can see that people are being biased against you because of your skin color.
When somebody tells you, you speak funny, when I'm speaking perfect English. When somebody, you know, and that's where, you see, that as an ally or as a person that what I would like for you to honor is my truth, because that's my truth that I'm sharing. It's not about my gender. Even though in some instances I have told a couple of friends, you know, you really have to go there because you have a dick and you have a part of balls that I don't have. And I really use that language because you need a male presence in order to run for that specific thing and get that done. So I recognize the power of being a male. But in the experiences that I'm sharing right now with you today is as a woman and it is as a person of color.
Yeah, and I think, and I believe that it's both.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it for women of color is it's very hard to know which one's playing, whether it's sexism or racism.
Mm-hmm.
And for me personally, to me, it's a given that it's one or the other or both. And since I cannot read someone's intention as to how they're responding or what they're not telling me it's because I'm a woman. They're not telling me it's because I'm a person of color. So as a person of color who happens to be a woman, I assume that one of those is playing out. And it doesn't matter if it's both or one or the other. Either way, I'm being impacted by somebody's bias towards me. Doesn't matter to me if it's because I'm a person of color or a woman. I'm still being impacted by somebody's prejudice and or bias or assumptions about me that they may not know. So I don't worry about their intent. I look at it from a matter of effect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if you came to the last meeting that was in here with Mark Harris, but he helped me with my son at the 4J schools, and he talks on a very, very intellectual level, extremely intellectual. And when we were in a meeting with school administrators, the principal, the vice principal, somebody else, a few people, I don't even know who they were, but they were high up in, and he was talking to them, and they were like looking right through him. It's like a surreal experience. I mean, he is so intelligent, he has so much to say, and it's so valid, but because of his color, I don't think they could hear what he said. I think that they just thought he was some, like you said, some angry. And I've heard people say that about you.
Have a reputation.
Yeah, she's right. And I everything that Mark had to say was valid, on point with what was going on with my son, valid points that we needed to deal with, but because of his color, they just did not hear him. And you're right about the male female thing. I see different experiences with my son and with my daughters. It's a whole conversation that probably take us days to discuss. But to answer I watched a specific situation where this man, should have been listened to and wasn't.
Well, look at our history. We had. We'll see who they elect.
So I'm sure that it happens, and I recognize the experience that you're talking about as far as prejudice against minorities and people of color. But like when I read this up here, to tell you, to be truthful with you, and I know this is your truth and this is your personal experience and this is how you see it, but I'm a little bit offended by the way that this is presented. And I feel that we should probably focus more on not like you're white and you're people of color, but rather if we direct our focus on that we're just all people and begin to try to not see people as a certain way of color or people as white, then we could begin. I mean, it's more of a solution rather than creating like a reverse kind of oppressive feeling towards being white because you have a privilege or like, to me this kind of like creates like a reverse racism in some ways, like towards white people, and I know that it's not intended for that purpose nor created for that. It's just that's the impression I get from the way it's here, because we live in a country that is actually doesn't really profess this kind of thing, but the unconscious, this makes sense to me here, where people see do things in respect to the way they act and know that they have a certain kind of status, and it's really kind of unknown. But to profess this here, people of color, unearned disadvantage, and disempowerment and internalized racism, and I realize that this is a personal experience. I just feel that the focus is way off center, that we really need to focus not really at this difference, but more towards what we are as being human. Anyway, I think the focus is off there.
So I'd like to respond. Because I think what you're saying is absolutely crucial, for this work, and this conversation is really very needed in this work. The words that I connect with you around is that yes, we do need to come together, and that common ground and that sense of connection is absolutely necessary in this work. My experience suggests that we need to do some of this work preliminary to coming together and being able to kind of work side by side. I've really, as a white person, and part of my experience is just mine, growing up in Seattle, growing up when I grew up, and growing up, and coming of age during the Vietnam War and all that. That's my personal experience. But part of my experience has been impacted by the color of my skin. And the key there is that for most of my life and today, I can walk around and be totally unconscious of the color of my skin. But I want to connect with you on one piece of that, is that the privilege that I have of walking around and not having to think about my race is an experience and a privilege that everybody deserves. That's a basic human right. I want to say that very strongly. And my experience now from listening, from hearing, from observing, from paying attention, tells me that for most people of color in the United States, they don't have that privilege.
Right, there's a problem. I realize that. I'm just saying.
But part of my privilege also allows me to walk around and not think about it. So part of my responsibility, with privilege comes responsibility. So it is my responsibility to speak to it, to hear it, to really know and to pay attention, to hear the stories and to understand the history, that a lot of the mythology that I grew up believing about equality in this nation, a lot of that mythology is not based in reality. It's a false mythology. And because I got so invested in the discussion, I have no idea who's next. So, Carmen, I'm going to defer.
Ruth and then
so many thoughts are going through my mind. I think, first of all, listening to other people's experience, and even though that experience might be different than my own, believing them, knowing that as we're hearing people say, and as I have over and over in my life, as I've begun to learn to listen to people of color saying, you know, I walked into a store with a friend who was white, the security guard followed me, and the friend says, gee, I didn't get followed, you know. But other than those kinds of experiences, if you look at things like the wealth gap in this country, if you compare the average household income of white families in the United States is about 10 times more. Not income, I mean wealth. Wealth is like if you take everything that you own and subtract your debts, that's what you have in your family. And so white families have, on an average, 10 times the accumulated wealth of black families. So that's not nothing. It's there for a reason. If you look at the history and the laws and the way race has been legislated through the Supreme Court, who's a citizen and why. And if you look at who's in prison, there's, 2.4 million people in prison, and 70% of them are people of color. So you can either look at it through listening to the stories of people who are opening this up to share, which is very painful, and just taking it in, even though it's different than my experience, to have the multiple perspectives and understand that it can still be true, even though I've never had that experience. And then to add to that by doing the research and reading and understanding that it also manifests in power and wealth. For example, up till now, every president has been a white man. You know, if we were truly an equitable society, if we had earned that colorblind status truly, we would have had many women and people of color all throughout all these 200 years. And it hasn't been the case, and there's a reason for that. So to ask questions like that and then go do the research, what are those reasons, I think will help raise our consciousness about the kinds of things they're trying to talk about. And rather than feel like, well, white people are being bashed, it's not about me as a white person individually, it's the system. Let's look at the system that puts white people at an advantage. It doesn't mean I'm not good or you're not good. It's examining the system and who the system favors.
Kara, and then... And what is your name, please? Magicus. I just want to say that I think that what you said was, I think that you had courage to say that, and that was a hard thing to say, because, and I think that must have hurt some of the people here, perhaps. I know that the wounds of racism are deep, and I also want to say, though, that I think that what you're calling for is a kind of humanism that is uniting, and that you see this, there's this like a divide right there, people of color, white people. And, you know, I can say, I'd like to say that I think that this, although this is completely wonderful and important, some tweaking could help some of us in the room. And I'll just tell a quick story that, you know, I'm born and raised in Springfield, but I lived for many years in Costa Rica with my former husband. And there I experienced a kind of, I don't know if you call it racism or not, but I was denied certain promotions in my work because I was an outsider. I wasn't a Costa Rican, and they wanted to uplift the native Costa Ricans, even though I was a resident and married. So, and that seemed fine to me, I suppose. But when I returned to the United States, and applied for some jobs, I was told twice to my face, in my hometown, born in Springfield, raised in an Anglo home, completely, podría hablar español mejor que muchos latinos aquí, porque había vivido 10 años y estudiado español, perfectamente bilingüe, y bicultural, 10 años, mi suegra, una latina, okay, so I came back completely bicultural, not completely, but anyway, very, very fluent and very, very well prepared for jobs, and I was told twice that I was the wrong color for a job, and in my hometown. And that hurt, that wounded me very deeply, because
What color did they want?
well, and I can understand what they wanted. They wanted the whole cultural experience. But again, they were judging on the skin color. And I was working for the Amigos de los Sobrevivientes, for a Center for Survivors of Torture. And I made a judgment call that was, people did not believe me because they saw it, because I was a blonde, right? I was a white Anglo blonde. They didn't understand what was going on. And then a year later, the person that I was trying to fire was fired for the same thing that I had said a year before, but I was not believed because they didn't. Anyway, what I'm just trying to say is that there's a truth, I think, that some people, especially poor white people, are hurt by this because because we know in this country that lots of people do not have the advantages, even if they're white. They suffer a lot too. So they do not suffer the wounds of racism, but they suffer the wounds of poverty. And so when you say white privilege, they're going, shit, this is not a privilege. I'm white trash, and they've got a lot of wounds. So this discourse has not structured in class often to build the natural place for what do I want to say? Shared suffering. Even though we don't have the same experience, we have experience of suffering that are similar, that need a little bit more honoring. And I don't mean to dishonor any of the wounds that you have suffered, but there's a wound too.
So we're right into the deep conversations in this work, and it's really needed. So I don't know who's next.
I'd just like to thank the two people for having the courage to share their experience. And I'd just like to make a couple of comments, and I think it's sort of a checkpoint that when we're talking about this, we are talking about the American experience. And for people who've lived in other parts of the world, if you're white, you don't always carry that privilege with you. I was born in northern Canada. I grew up in a community where I was white, and white represented 20% of the population. I was excluded. Because of my color. I was regularly beat up after school because of my color. So it shouldn't be about, it's about differences in society. And how we use those differences to create power structures. It's not about black and white. It's not about male or female. I see the same power structures being used against children, against elderly people, against people that are too fat, against people that are too thin, against people that are... It's a sickness that we have in society, that we use anything we can that's visible to create power structures and differences, to give ourselves some type of advantage. And I think we need to move beyond that discussion and go deeper into that deeper discussion about why do we create these differences, whatever they are, because that's really what tears us apart and doesn't allow us to really connect with people and empathize with them. We do it. One of my biggest complaints is we also have this, we call it digital divide now, where we start to separate people on technology, but we've always had intellectual elitism as well. Somebody who's educated should be listened to more than somebody who isn't. We all have important things to say. And so I hear the messages coming out. We all have our personal experiences where in our lives we've experienced discrimination based on some attribute that we feel should not have been used So I think it's a pretty universal experience, and certainly living in other parts of the world, you realize it's not about white versus colored people. So
could I ask, are there, because you were talking about the civil rights movement, is there, I know that we have some laws that protect from discriminating against the public in a general way versus, I mean, like, not versus, but against people of skin color and age and those kinds of things. Now, is there something written into the law that, I know the federal government does it, and are we trying to create some laws here that actually help to try to promote more of an equality in the workplace?
So I think that's an important question, but I want to go back one conversation before we go to that.
Okay.
Because I think, for me, what really resonates for me is that, yes, we are talking about oppression and the different forms of oppression and the ways that we are divided by that oppression, the ways that some benefit and others don't benefit. So yes, we are talking about oppression. One of the reasons that I highlight the discussion about race and racism is I think that's a conversation that we don't have very often in Lane County. And because of my work with schools, when I look at the inequalities in terms of who's graduating and who's not, who's going on to college and who's not, who's meeting benchmarks and who's not, who's passing, who's failing, who's going to prison, the shocking and most appalling form of oppression that I see is around race and differences in race, different treatment, different experiences, and different outcomes. So this work, so I don't think Carmen and I want to give the impression that this work is only about racism. This work is about oppression.